Discussion tonight. I am joined by the state senator who was slammed in the State House this week. That's Brian Sims from Pennsylvania. Also MSNBC contributor Joy Reid with us tonight, and gay activist and journalist Mike Rogers. Great to have all of you on board here. I mean, Mike, let's start with you. There is some pretty pointed rhetoric now coming from the conservatives. They are connecting that they are making the pitch that America may not survive as a country because gay people are being recognized in society. What's your reaction to that?
Well, those are the same people, Ed, who don't care about global warming. If they really cared about the health of the American people and the world, they would focus on that instead of focusing on what already we've had in Massachusetts for almost 10 years without any problems whatsoever. So this is a desperate last effort for part of the religious community to go after the gay and lesbian community. I just want to say that there's been many churches that have supported the gay community in this effort, and synagogues and other religions. The Presbyterian Church, for example, the National Cathedral, which is the nation's symbolic church, they celebrated with a special ringing of the bells when the marriage case was won at the Supreme Court. So I think what we have here is rhetoric, as you've said, by a small handful of very angry people who are misusing religion and misstating the facts.
Joy Reid, can the Republican Party survive taking this stand on the altar, for lack of a better term? I believe that this is going to be played out in every state house in this country by the right wing who's trying to inject their faith into the governmental process. I mean, there's only 13 states that recognize gay marriage. Where do you think this is going?
Well, I think that part of the reason that the religious right in particular is alarmed by this ruling is that it did essentially set up a separate and unequal system of marriage. So that in the 13 states that allow gay marriage, then those couples will be recognized fully by the federal government, but in the 37 other states, they will not. So that you could actually get married in New York, move to Florida, and lose the recognition of your marriage, at least at the state level. And I think what that really does set up are battles in each of those states, or at least in a lot of them, many of which are Republican governed, where you're going to have gay couples essentially use the California model and say that they are being denied equal protection under the law, because the Supreme Court really did specifically say that moral opprobrium is not a reason that you can deny people rights, that people have a First Amendment right to object to this notion of marriage between men and women and women. You can object to that morally under the First Amendment, but as a matter of the 14th Amendment, you can't then deny them rights. So it does set up a few battles that they're probably going to be very contentious and ugly for the religious right.
Are going to have they are going to have major battles. I mean, the next Republican National Convention for 2016, this is going to be a Donnybrook, because we have seen societal attitudes and the viewpoint of all of this shifting in a big way. But there seems to be a lot of conservatives who are stuck in the mud, like the gentleman from Pennsylvania who was silencing our next guest, Brian Sims. Mr. Sims, you were silenced by Republicans this week. What do you think America needs to know?
Well, Ed, first of all, thank you for having me on. And I think that this is a really important issue that America needs to know about. You know, right now, there are, as you just suggested, there are legislators all across the country that are gearing up to do battle with LGBT Americans, to do battle with civil rights. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that when they are losing, and let's be clear, they are most definitely losing. By every metric that we can measure, right now, LGBT civil rights is advancing in the United States and is going to continue to advance. And so what's happening is we're seeing these opponents lash out, and sometimes it's embarrassing, sometimes it's just wholly wrong, and I think that what we saw on the House floor in Pennsylvania was a little of both.
Yeah. Mike, I want to ask you this about the laws of nature. This is what Louis Gohmert mentioned on the House floor as we played the tape earlier. The laws of nature, and then he also made the comment about children being affected. Your thoughts on all of that? What do you think of that it's hurting the children, that argument that the conservatives are making?
Well, I think we only have to look in places that are where there are children being raised by LGBT couples. They're some of the healthiest, most well-adjusted children. They have the least incidence of being bullies. So I think that we look at these marriages as really healthy for kids of LGBT parents. So it's more of their mythology, Ed. And I think that what really is happening is Louis Gohmert is really stepping up to the plate to fill the soon-to-be empty shoes of Michelle Bachmann. I mean, he is just so off the map on some of his stuff, and we're going to see more of him. And he's actually a benefit to the left because he is the personification of some of this insane rhetoric, the holy quadruple or whatever he's saying, and all of these various things about the court calling it illegitimate these guys have done. So they're okay with the 98-2 vote of the Senate, 98-0 vote of the Voting Rights Act being tossed. But when something they like is not tossed, then all of a sudden it's activist judges and all of those things.
Brian, your thoughts on the aspect of children being affected? This is one of the arguments that conservatives continually throw out.
You know, I think Michael just hit on it best. We know absolutely now from the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, that children that are raised by LGBT families are doing great. The truth is, I would suggest that children that are raised by people who are treating them hatred, people that are treating them bigotry, I think they're the ones that are really going to suffer. Because, like I said earlier, we know that we're winning this. And so if you're raising your child to live in a world where he or she thinks that everybody looks and sounds just like you, or that you're allowed to silence them for what they are thinking, then I think we have a bigger problem.
And Ed, if I could just say really quickly, because there was a time, you know, when the idea of African Americans and white Americans marrying each other was talked about the same way, that it was against God's law, that there were all of these sort of biological reasons why it shouldn't be done, that it would harm children. So we've been here before, and I think the right has to understand that being on the wrong side of a civil rights fight is always a losing bet.
Yeah. Well, we also heard a lot about that when interracial marriage began to take off in this country. We heard the exact same arguments that we're hearing right now from the conservatives. It would destroy the family. It would affect children. The other thing I was struck by, the Gay Pride parade here in Minneapolis today, the number of families that were out there. And I think Americans now more than ever understand discrimination, but now they're willing to really fight back collectively against it. And this is the Donnybrook that is going to be taking place, I believe, in the Republican Party. And to you, Joy, how can Chris Christie think about getting the nomination from Republicans if he doesn't take this stand against gay marriage?
Right, and Chris Christie has done so many things that have made him an apostate in the Republican Party, from they feel embracing Barack Obama instead of Mitt Romney, accepting that money for Hurricane Sandy. And so now you're seeing him try to reposition himself to the right because he still wants to be viable in 2016. But the problem is he's also positioning himself against the younger members of the Republican Party and the conservative movement itself, because younger conservatives are moving away from their elders on these issues. So increasingly you're seeing the older conservatives isolating themselves even within their own movement.
They are. Representative Sims, what can local legislators do to move gay rights forward in this country? What has to be done?
Well, first and foremost, they need to work with their LGBT constituents. You know, we learned in the 2000 census that there are LGBT people in 99.8% of counties. I'd argue that we're a little bit everywhere, but maybe they didn't fill out the survey. You know, we've seen the civil rights movement move in the last 25 years, what took the traditional civil rights movement about 65 years. And the reason we saw that is because of the support of our allies, getting out, working directly with our legislators, introducing municipal non-discrimination clauses, working to introduce statewide non-discrimination clauses like we're doing here in Pennsylvania.
Mike, your prediction. 13 states have gay marriage. By the time we get to the midterms, what will the number be?
Well, by the time we get to the midterms in 2014, I predict probably 3 or 4 more states. But more important, I think what we're seeing, and which Brian spoke about earlier, are these allies. When we look at, for example, places like the Human Rights Campaign, their numbers of ally members are extraordinary, whereas just 5 or 6 years ago, it was only LGBT people on the front line of these fights. And now we're seeing just across the country, in Mississippi, by the year 2020, a majority of the people there will say, we think marriage equality. So if that, and that's the final state. So this battle is cleanup. We need to fight hard in those states. We need to bring it back to the court, and we will win.
And Ed,
Mike Rogers, Joy Reid, and I got to run. State Representative Brian Sims, Joy Reid, and Mike Rogers. Thanks so much for being with us on this issue on the Ed Show tonight. It's a big, big day when it comes